Alright, so before I get into the video, I do want to let you know about a Banggood 9.9 sales coming up pretty soon. Part of the sale is a PayPal extra discount. So if you use PayPal, you can get $6 off of any $120 order or $10 off of any $250 order. And it's only for the first 400 customers that use the discount. The first part of the sale will be from the 1st to the 3rd of September with some warm-up deals. And then they're going to have the main sale going from September 4th to the 9th, and then the 10th and 11th will have some ending deals to finish up the sale. Links will be in the description to the various categories, and that'll be like the best place to check out the deals. So those links will be down in the video description. Alright, so I'm finally getting my video out on the Jumper T20S, and yes, this is the S version, not the original T20, which had a very short life. Apparently it was available for order on AliExpress, I believe, and a few people ordered it, and I'm not sure exactly how many, and they quickly discontinued it. And basically this whole release of this T20 radio has been kind of messed up by Jumper, and they have admitted as much to me. Basically, some of these, I guess the updated T20S radios got released early by Banggood to a few of their selected reviewers, I guess some of the big channels, and yeah, they weren't supposed to do that. So some of the videos got out way earlier than they should have. Nevertheless, the differences between the T20 and the T20S are pretty minor. They've added this foldable antenna, which rotates, of course, which is nice. And you can actually kind of use it as a handle. And they've replaced the handle that was on the T20. I believe there was that's what these rubber covers are for. There was a CNC machined aluminum handle here previously, and they got rid of that. And then, of course, there was a hole here somewhere for the antenna where you would screw in. Of course, they've replaced that with this foldable antenna, which I think is better. And I believe, well, they had, I guess the T20 had Hall sensor gimbals, and this one here, which is the RDC 90 gimbals. I'll get into all that here a little bit later. It's a lengthy discussion, but they also have the same two gimbal versions in the T20S. Some stores aren't selling the Hall sensor version, only the RDC 90. I'm not sure why that is. Banggood at least still has all the different versions, so you can get this in a wide variety of different versions to your liking. So yeah, it comes with Express LRS 2.4 gigahertz, 868 megahertz, and 915 megahertz versions. They all use the same handle antenna here, of course, and I'll say 2.4 or whatever frequency you've got on there. Obviously, I went for 2.4 because the receiver antennas are a lot smaller, and the range is about the same pretty much. They do also sell different versions with multiple receivers, so you can get a bundle with the radio plus three receivers, and you can also get the radio with the multi-protocol module, which looks like this. It's nice and thin, and you have to attach it to the back. I'll explain how to get this on there a little later in the video, but just quickly, what else comes in the box? Get the user's guide, of course, but as you can see from the pictures, it's on the older version with the handle there and the removable antenna. And so everything in here was based off of the original T20 version. Obviously, not a huge number of differences, but this is basically a quick start guide. We'll get into what's missing a little bit later. We get these stickers here, and that is for the 6 position switches here in the front, so you can label these. So obviously, Jumper likes to sort of, I guess, make their radios more accessible to like airplane pilots. Radio Master typically is targeting FPV drone pilots, and so a lot of their radios don't have all the bells and whistles that some of the airplane pilots would want. Of course, that's kind of debatable. Honestly, for most of the radios, they have enough for plane pilots, although there's always the really loud complainers out there saying, oh, they don't do enough. Well, I think they do. Jumper tries to do more, but it's also debatable as well. You get this battery tray with a 2S balanced lead connector. This fits 21700 cells, so much bigger cells. They will fit 18650s as well. You just have to bend these little pins here, or this little metal piece here. If you push this out with like a screwdriver on both sides. That will shrink this space here, and then this 18650 cells will fit in here as well. You get a neck strap and a USB-C cable for charging and data. So it didn't come with a battery, and I don't have any 21700 cells, but I'll link some down in the video description in case you're wondering where to get them, but they're fairly common. You can get them pretty much anywhere. Amazon's a pretty popular place. You can also pick them up, Race Day Quads, Pyrodrone, etc. So for me, I just used like a 2-cell LiPo in the back here, just plugged it in to the balance lead port. It's not a huge LiPo, so obviously your power on time is going to vary based on which battery you use. So I didn't test the power on time with this tiny battery in here. It's kind of pointless. I believe they're saying it's up to 10 hours at 1 watt on the 21700 cells. I think they're recommending like a 4500 milliamp hour. So the milliamp hour rating of the cells you're using will also be a factor in terms of your power on time. And just a quick sort of comparison to some of the more recent radios. I'm not going to show you every single one that's come on my channel because there's just way too many. Here's the Pocket, and the Pocket's much smaller. Obviously, they got the mini gimbals here versus the full-size gimbals, but they're not really full-size gimbals on the T20. I'll explain that in a minute. And here it is next to the Boxer, which is probably the one that most people are going to compare this to. Essentially, it's a sort of shrunken down version of the Boxer. You know, it's basically in the vertical direction. It's about the same. It's a little bit thinner than the Boxer. Boxer's pretty thick. So basically, in terms of the weight differences between the three, we've got the Pocket at 288 grams, no batteries. The T20S is 448 grams, no batteries, and the Boxer is 532 grams, again with no batteries. And the weight difference, the weight will vary based on what batteries you happen to use in these. So something to keep in mind. So I just wanted to show you or tell you what the weights were of the three without any batteries. So of course they were able to shrink down the radio because they don't have a giant screen on here, which is, I think, fantastic. Yeah, I was getting kind of tired of all the radios with gigantic screens that are completely useless for FPV. And so if you're an FPV drone pilot, you never look at your screen, you just use it for setting up stuff. And basically these little tiny screens are, in my opinion, more than adequate to get the job done. This is the same, I think it's like 1.3-inch OLED screen. This is a black and white OLED screen, which is the same one that's on the Beta FPV Lite Radio 3 Pro, and also I think the Tango 2 has the same screen, which is more than fine for setting up your models. And so going around the radio here, showing you all the switches. The two in the front here are 3 position switches, and the two on the shoulder here are 2 position switches here. You've got a latching switch over here, and you have to press on the outer edge of the switch and it'll latch, and it does take a fair amount of pressure. The spring is pretty strong on this latch, and you got one on the other side as well. Kind of wish that they would have put a momentary switch somewhere up here, but they did not do that. Although you can use one of these additional trim switches as a momentary switch. You'll have to program that in EdgeTX. And then you have these 2 dials up on top, these with potentiometer dials here. They do have a detent in the middle here on both of these. So for those of you that maybe have a pan and tilt servo for your like head tracker or whatever on your airplane, this is probably, you know, what would be a good place for those, and that's what they would use. You got also some dials here in the front that don't have a detent, but they do have a little marker here showing where the center should be. And yeah, obviously I don't use these at all, so you know, I honestly can't tell you if these are great or not. They're okay, they're fairly smooth, but no centering detent on this one, and none on these either. And these are supposed to be some sort of like special throttle sliders or something. Not exactly sure what those are for. Never used anything like that for an airplane before. And then of course you got your 6 position switches here, which you can assign to different functions. Of course, those are all programmable in EdgeTX. Got your trim switches here. So these are basically, you can push them in 4 directions, and you can also press down on them. So these are your menu buttons here on the left. I'll explain how these work when I turn on the radio here in a second. And then you have a scroll wheel here, which you can press down on. So this works pretty nice as well. And then I believe the speaker is either out of here or here. I'm not 100% sure. Then let's go ahead and just turn it on. You can hear it.
Welcome to EdgeTX.
Okay, so Jumper has gone with this philosophy of using less buttons, but using the short and long press function of the buttons to give you different results on what happens, whereas Radio Master's philosophy is to give you a button for everything. So for example, you have a model button over here on the right, and then you have a system button here on the left, and then in the Jumper you have a single button here, this top button here, which will give you both. So if you short press it, gives you the model menu, and this is the back or return over here, and if you long press it, it gives you into the system menu. And then the middle button here is going to be page forward for short press. So you can see paging forward 2, 3, 4, and then if you long press, it goes backwards. So this is sort of how they wanted their buttons to use, and of course the scroll wheel does the same thing, scrolls, and you can select with that. Something to note, the default model that's in here has a weird channel order for what's, I don't know why it's in the mixer. It's very uncommon, so I deleted that completely. So just keep that in mind if you try and set up your models normally. Their channel order is not AETR or TAER, which is the two most common ones. It's like REAT or something like that. It's really bizarre, so I just deleted it. So just something to keep in mind. All right, so just finishing up the rest of what's on the radio here, we have the USB-C port here, and on the Jumper, it can be used for charging the battery, as well as joystick and access to the storage that's built into the system board, which, by the way, there's no micro SD card on this one. I think it's like 512 megabytes of onboard storage. It's on the circuit board, which is great because most people typically put in the wrong kind of card, the wrong format, and it's always messing up the radio and they can't get it to work. So I think that's a right step in the right direction. And then I believe this one over here is your trainer port. So unlike Radio Master, this one here does charge and does data and everything all together. But this does not do quick charge. 3.0 does not work correctly. At least I tried, it didn't work. So any of those kind of like charges with like USB-C power delivery or quick charge 3.0, 2.0 does not charge up the battery any faster. It's the same speed as a standard 5-volt charger. So in the back here, you have a large heatsink here for the 1-watt Express LRS transmitter, which is great. No fan inside, so it's all passive cooling. This does get pretty warm on high power, so when you're wrapping your hands around here, you just be careful you don't touch this. It might not burn you, but it's going to be pretty uncomfortable when it gets really hot, especially if you're at high power. You got a flap here. You can remove this door, and you've got the plug there for your 4-in-1 multi-protocol module, and then you have an XT30 for external power. So they did not send me the module bay adapter, which I think will allow you to connect up nano modules to this one. I believe you can buy those from AliExpress. If I can find the link, I'll put that in the video description. And I don't actually know what that looks like. I just know that it exists, but they did not send that to me. If you want to install the multi-protocol module, it's pretty easy to do. Obviously, if you're using the multi-protocol module, you don't have to worry about heat coming from the heatsink here, because the Express LRS transmitter will be turned off. So I know people are wondering, hey, what about that? All right, to get this multi-protocol module on here, you're going to remove this cover. You're going to put this adapter plate on here, and it'll line up on these screws over here. And the screws are actually inside the bags here, and they're in the corner like that. So don't lose them. I was kind of wondering at first where the hell the screws were. That's where they are. So you can put this on here, and then you can see the little hole there for the connector. And then the connector is this one right here. And you're going to plug that in there, and then they're going to screw the multi-protocol module on top onto this. This will go in like this. And then this uses a MMC connector for the antenna. And it's like this one here. And the antenna is included, of course. And that is how you get the multi-protocol module on there. So it's a nice design, nice and compact. All right, so let's get into the whole subjective area here of how this feels, at least to me. I'll give you my opinion and how it compares to some of the other radios I've used in the past. This is entirely subjective, so what might be good for me might be completely bad for you. It's impossible for me to know how this will feel to you, because everyone's got some sort of their own subjective ideas of how a radio should feel or what they should do. There's going to be some people saying that, for example, the gimbals, the radio are going to make the pilot, and I don't believe that's the case. I've seen plenty of really good pilots out there doing amazing stuff with their quads with completely junk radios, terrible gimbals that don't even work right, yet they can still fly amazing. So the radio isn't going to hold you back in terms of you becoming a better pilot. That's totally on you, in my opinion. The radio is not really going to make any difference. So if you think, getting the best possible radio for you is going to help you become an amazing pilot, I disagree with that. I don't think that's going to make any difference whatsoever. That being said, let me tell you what I think is good about this radio, and what could be better, at least for me. So these gimbals here, there's a whole. I could do a whole video on just the gimbals, and I don't want to do that. But I'll just give you sort of like the nutshell. And I don't know what the Hall sensor gimbals feel like or how they perform. I have no idea. I did not try those. I can tell you that those are pretty much all plastic, and these are a combination. These RDC90s are a combination of plastic and metal. They're not the same quality as the all metal gimbals from Radiomaster, the AG01s and the AG01 minis. And that's because, whenever you have plastic in the gimbals, it does allow a little bit more movement in the gimbal, especially if you're a stick banger and you're doing this kind of thing all the time, which I don't, but there are some people that do. Then the quality of the plastic is going to matter. And some, radios, like the plastic in this one on this gimbal is pretty solid. There's obviously if you go to the first generation Beta FPV radios they sold for I think $20 or $30, that plastic was pretty soft, so the stick would just kind of bend the whole gimbal. But the ones on the Pocket, this plastic is pretty high quality, so even if you stick bang on this one, you don't get a lot of bending or warping or deformation of the plastic when you're using this gimbal. So it has a lot to do with the quality of the plastic. But comparing this RDC90 gimbal to the one that's on the Boxer, this is not the AG01, this is just a standard, gimbal here. This one I think is mostly plastic as well. This feels better, in my opinion, than the RDC90 gimbal. The spring tension is pretty, in terms of stock spring tension, is pretty strong on most Radiomaster radios, which I personally don't like. I personally like the spring tension that comes default out of the box on the jumper radios. It's a lot looser, which is my preference. But the springs that they use on all of their gimbals that I've, in my experience, it's going to be very hard to hear this, but maybe it's because the quality of the spring is worse, or it's just a weaker spring. Maybe that's why it's so loose. But you can hear, if you kind of, you're not going to be able to hear this on, I put my ear up right next to the gimbal. At certain positions in the gimbal, you hear this creaking sound, and I believe that's the spring rubbing against the plastic part of the gimbal that the spring is attached to. And so that is just you can feel it when you're moving the gimbal around. It's a very subtle feeling, and maybe I'm a bit OCD, but that does bother me a bit. You don't get that on the springs on the Radiomaster gimbals, but those are really, really stiff, which is in and of itself is a negative, in my opinion. They're too stiff, which is one of the reasons I think I mentioned that in the Pocket review. These springs are just way too stiff. Now they did send me another set of springs, but haven't gotten around to switching them out yet. So the Hall sensor gimbals, which are mostly plastic, versus these RDC90 gimbals, which are a combination of metal and plastic. This uses a potentiometer sensor. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of debate. Okay, why they do that? It's kind of bizarre because most gimbals nowadays are just Hall sensor because the cost difference isn't that much different. So I'm not sure why they went that route, because people are going to complain that potentiometers will wear out, whereas Hall sensor gimbals don't wear out. And that may be true, but the potentiometers on this are probably not going to wear out anytime within the lifetime of this radio that you're going to use it for before you move on to the next radio. So let's assume you use this for a year, maybe 2 years. You know, there's so many new radios coming up, people switch constantly. These potentiometers are probably going to be totally fine. I had these a long time ago. I started off with the Tyrannus, like the X9D, with the stock gimbals. Those had potentiometer gimbals, and they lasted me for like 4 years before I started having problems. And I was still flying with like bad jittery gimbals for like a year, and it was okay. I eventually swapped out the gimbals, and that fixed my problems, of course. But the potentiometers, they do wear out, but they will last a fairly long time. And by that time, you're probably going to be moving on to another radio. So I wouldn't be too terribly concerned about that. But it is an odd decision because, this is supposedly a nicer gimbal with metal and plastic, and they could have put a Hall sensor gimbal in there for not much more, but they elected to not do that. So it was a kind of bizarre choice on their part. So they're advertising this as a full-size gimbal, but the travel is restricted in a way where it's more like a mini gimbal. So let me explain. There are these little like pieces here which you can adjust in and out, and this restricts the sideways or lateral movement here on both gimbals. And then under these plates here, there is a hole for a screw that you can remove, and then if you remove that screw, that will eliminate this restriction on the up and down axis. So it's restricted, as you can see here. So in terms of the amount of travel you get, this is more like a mini gimbal. What you do is you remove these 4 screws here, take these little pieces off, and you can slide these further out or just completely remove them altogether. And then that will give you more travel this way. And then you can adjust these screws here to give you more travel up and down. But I believe if you remove these little pieces here, you'll get more lateral movement than up and down movement. So it'll be like basically not even in both directions, which will be kind of weird. Now for me, I prefer mini gimbals anyway, so I'm totally fine with the amount of travel on this one, and I'm able to reach my full extent here. And the fact that the stick sits a little further down the radio helps. I don't know. I mean, I would hold it like this. It's a bit heavy for me, honestly, because I prefer the lighter radios. But I'm able to fully utilize the gimbal, at least for my hands, without having to adjust the travel movement at all. Now, if you want to adjust the spring tension, you have to take the whole radio apart. So they don't make it very easy. It's kind of hard to remove these back rubber covers. You have to get like a spudger and then pull this off. And then there's a bunch of screws. You have to take the back cover off. It's basically not that easy. And I'm told that even if you adjust the screws for the spring tension adjustment, the springs are so loose that even if you do the maximum tension adjustment, it's still, I guess, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. So if you're hoping to get stiffer springs by opening up the radio and making those adjustments on the screws, I would suggest just switching the springs out altogether while you're in there with something that's a lot more stiffer, if that's what you prefer. But yeah, for me, I'm not going to touch it because this is pretty much exactly the kind of the tension I am looking for in a gimbal. So I'm pretty happy with that. All right, last but not least, do you want to talk about the placement of the neck strap holder? It's a bit in the wrong spot, but the battery's down here at the bottom, so it is a little bit bottom heavy. So it's not too bad here. I have a kind of a lighter battery inside here, but if you have 2 big 21700 cells in there, it's gonna be more like this. I think that maybe in the next version, Jumper should swap the position of where the neck strap holder is and the power button. If it's over here, then it'll be more balanced if you're using a neck strap. Just a minor little thing, just wanted to point out, not a big deal. Obviously, you can get those neck strap extenders that'll come out like this, and then that will then obviously have it in a nice balanced place for the neck strap. So it's not a deal breaker in my opinion, but just something worth noting if that's a big deal for you. And then just a couple of things here that I didn't like. The glossy finish on this section of the radio, I don't like. I don't know, it's just a fingerprint magnet. They could have gone with just maybe like a matte finish on here. Would have been fine, similar to the matte finish in here. I do like this sort of navy dark blue color. It's sort of almost black. It's like a midnight blue color. definitely like that. And then the texture on the plastic is pretty solid in my opinion. I actually like this better than what was on the previous jumper radios with that gray color. Honestly, when I first saw photos of this and the renders, I thought this looked really, I don't know, pretty cheap based on the photos and the renders I saw online. The quality doesn't come through in camera. It's hard to explain. It just feels nice in the hand. The materials feel really good, in my opinion. Now, I think they probably made this radio a little bit too fat, in my opinion, because when you take it apart, the gimbal sits a lot higher up. There's a lot of hollow space in here, so if you kind of knock on this here, you can hear it's pretty hollow. So the circuit board in here is really tiny. So obviously they made it so that, try to make it ergonomic for people holding it that like the bigger gimbals, but don't necessarily want, like, you know, the weight and the size of the full-size radio, but it's sort of like a chopped off full-size radio with a smaller screen. So I get what they did here, but yeah, I mean, this is something that you can easily fix. You open it up, and what you do is you just put some adhesive foam on the inside where these plastic pieces are, because the plastic's a little bit thin, so it feels a little bit hollow. I mean, it doesn't feel too solid. So, I mean, it's easily fixed. I've done it before on other radios. Just something to note. But otherwise, in terms of the look, it looks way better in person, in my opinion, than all the photos and stuff I saw online. Just didn't come out very well on camera. Anyway, I think this video has gone way longer than necessary. I just wanted to make sure that I covered all the bases on this particular model. It's an interesting model. I'm not going to be using this as my daily driver. I'm pretty happy with the Pocket and going to continue to use that. This, I think, is an interesting radio for maybe someone that likes the Boxer, but maybe wants something a little bit lighter, a little bit smaller. You know, maybe it wants maybe the collapsible antenna, because that's one of the bigger complaints from people that got the Boxers, that the antenna is not collapsible. There is a fairly not terribly difficult mod for the Boxer where you can make the antenna internal. Yeah, I haven't really looked into that because I don't use the Boxer, but there are mods out there available for people to address some of their shortcomings of that. And if you just want the tinier screen with less weight, and don't, you know, maybe you want the looser springs on the gimbal, then this may be the way to go instead of the Boxer. But overall, the Boxer is a higher quality radio, in my opinion, better engineered. So yeah, if you're kind of up in the air between the two, I would probably go for the Boxer versus this one. I would only go for this one if you specifically want, like, you know, the fact that it's kind of shorter, you know, the smaller screen, etc., those sort of features. You know, the 1 watt Express LRS transmitter with no fan, because the fan noise on the Boxer is pretty annoying. Stuff like that. The bigger 21700 cells, that could make a difference as well. So those are the main differences, I think. You know, if that will drive your decision, then yeah, go for the T20. Anyway, I think that's going to cover for this video. Hopefully you found the video helpful. If you did, I would appreciate a thumbs up on the video. It would really help out the channel. And consider subscribing if you haven't already. That'll do it for this video. Talk to you guys in the next one.